Hi, welcome to Kingdom Seeker Circle. This is the 13th video in the series going through Matthew, and we've already talked about the first disciples that Jesus called. And so, let's move into this section for today. And a reminder that we are talking about what the text says, why Matthew's narrative is saying that, and what stands out that gives weight to the context. So with that being said, let's begin. Some passages don't tell a whole long story. Instead, they tell you everything you need to know all at once. Matthew 4 verses 23 through 25 is one of those passages. In just 3 verses, Matthew gives us a panoramic view of Jesus' ministry. He doesn't slow the camera down just yet, but he pulls it back, and what we see is the foundation for everything that follows. Matthew tells us that Jesus goes throughout all of Galilee. That word throughout matters a lot. That means that Jesus isn't stationary. He isn't waiting for people to come to him. He goes to them. And as he goes, Matthew highlights 3 things that Jesus does. He teaches in the synagogues, he proclaims the good news of the kingdom, and he heals every disease and sickness among the people. Now, this is not accidental ordering, but these 3 are all essential to how he advances the kingdom. Teaching shapes the understanding of the people. The proclamation confronts the allegiance, that is to say, he is speaking on the Father's authority, and healing restores what is broken. And Matthew wants us to see that the kingdom of heaven is not an idea alone. It is an invasion of restoration, and the result is unavoidable. The news about Jesus spreads, not just locally, not just within Galilee, but it spreads even into Syria. People begin to bring him people who are suffering physically, mentally, and spiritually. They bring the demon-possessed, they bring people having seizures, and the paralyzed. And Matthew says simply, Jesus healed them. Now, there's no technique described in how he does this. There's no ritual explained. There's just the authority that he heals them. And then comes the response. Great crowds follow him from Galilee, from the Decapolis, from Jerusalem, from Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. And that list is intentional. Matthew is telling us that Jesus is already drawing a following that crosses religious centers, political boundaries, and ethnic regions. First, this passage functions as a summary. Matthew is just about to present the Sermon on the Mount, arguably the most concentrated teaching block in Matthew's narrative, but before Jesus opens his mouth to teach the crowds, Matthew establishes why anyone should listen. Jesus is not speaking from abstraction. He is speaking as one whose words are already changing lives. Authority precedes instruction. It means that authority informs us on how we receive instruction. No one is going to listen to bad authority when it is in their faces clearly, right? Second, Matthew is showing us the nature of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is not merely an announcement being made. It's certainly not a prediction or a plan that's coming next, but it is a present action of its reality being enacted. Jesus doesn't say the kingdom is coming someday and leave it at that. No, he teaches truth. He says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is near. Okay? He proclaims the good news, and he heals what sin and suffering have broken. Matthew is showing us a holistic kingdom, a kingdom that addresses belief, belonging, and brokenness all at once. Third, Matthew is widening our vision. By naming regions like Syria and the Decapolis, Matthew hints at something bigger than Israel. This Messiah is not provincial. From the very beginning, his presence draws in outsiders. The story is already pressing beyond ethnic borders, and there are details here that deserve our attention. So, the first is that threefold rhythm: teaching, proclamation, and healing. If any one of these are removed, the picture becomes distorted. Truth without compassion becomes unapproachable, healing without truth becomes shallow, and proclamation without either becomes just loud noise. So Matthew presents a Messiah whose ministry is balanced, integrated, and complete. Second, notice the kinds of people that are brought to Jesus. Matthew doesn't sanitize suffering, he names it. There's people with spiritual torment, there's people with chronic illness, neurological conditions, physical paralysis. This tells us something very profound. This means that there is no hierarchy of brokenness in the kingdom of heaven. Nothing disqualifies someone from approaching Jesus. And third, look at the crowds. Before Jesus delivers the Sermon on the Mount, he already has a following that is massive, mixed, and diverse. And this matters because when Jesus begins to speak about the poor in spirit, about mercy, about loving your enemies, he is not speaking to a sheltered audience. He is speaking to people who have been healed, delivered, restored, and these are people still desperate for hope. And so Matthew wants us to feel the weight of this moment. Jesus is not a local teacher with just good ideas. No, he is a king whose presence reorganizes reality. And this passage prepares us for what comes next. The Sermon on the Mount is not just theory. It is the voice of a king whose kingdom is already breaking in. Before Jesus tells us how to live in the kingdom, Matthew shows us what life looks like when the kingdom arrives. People move toward him, brokenness meets authority, and the reach of grace expands beyond expectation. And this is the beginning of a movement that cannot be contained. And Matthew wants us to know this before we ever see a single beatitude. And with that being said, the next video will be on the Sermon of the Mount. And I want you to notice some things that are very, 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 very essential. Go in peace, have a great day, and God bless.